friends. Welcome back to another episode of GM Philosophy in the Morning. I'm the GM Philosopher. The videos I'm going to make today, tomorrow, and the next day, so a three-part series, are going to be part of a three-part series where I'm going to tell the story of one of my first, most successful long-term D&D campaigns. So it's going to be story time. I'm basically going to talk about my thought process behind the story. I'm just going to tell the story of some of the wild things that happened, and just a general overview. It's story time, guys. It's story time. So if you like hearing people talk about their D&D stories, you want to hear some insights behind some of my most successful campaigns, then this might be interesting to you. If not, this might not be interesting to you, but we're just going to dive into it here. So basically, this campaign that I want to talk about it was a long-term story, but there were 3 campaigns, each one lasting a couple of years long, put into this about a 10-year arc. And this was basically called the Mazac Campaign. And so what it was most of it was played in like a homebrewed version of Greyhawk with the 3rd edition Pantheon gods. So the gods were in the 3rd edition book. All 3 of these games I think they were 3rd edition, I believe. Actually, the 3rd one might have been run in 5th edition. No, I think they were all 3rd edition. I'm pretty sure they were all 3rd edition. Anyway, so here is basically what happened. So in the first campaign, which was basically a campaign about a world that was dying and the magic was leaving. So what was going on here? The characters began play as soldiers at the end of a war. There was a war being fought, but then the 2 armies basically signed a truce, and they were both suffering such bad casualties that they decided just to call it quits, basically. Everyone just petered out of the war. And then the characters ended up going back to the camp, and they were all in the same unit. Basically, they were kind of like a special forces type unit. So they were, exceptional player characters. But here's what happened. They got back to the unit, and they got approached by this wizard character who was like, listen, the war is over, this war, but the real war is only beginning. You have been recommended by the general for a special assignment. We would like for you to continue with the war effort. I would like for you to come with me, and I want to show you a secret project. And so these characters were like, oh, okay, fine. So they had no prospects. They really had no money. Basically, conditions were so bad that the army didn't even pay them what they owed them. So they were kind of like, we're good to bounce on this. Let me give you just a little bit more backdrop. This world was dying. This was pretty well decided. Basically, magic was leaving from the world. Magic was no longer working as well as it used to. It used to be that wizards could cast their spells, grand spells, and clerics could commune with the gods and get their powers from them. But alas, these days, it was rare to find a magic user powerful enough to cast little more than a cantrip. And to be really honest, the vast majority of spellcasters were rendered completely powerless by this point. Magic was disappearing from the world. And so everyone kind of thought, this is the end of magic. But why is it happening? Nobody really knew. It was like a mystery, just a great cosmic phenomenon that had been happening slowly over the course of about a decade. Now, these players followed this wizard character for several miles until they reached this secret base. Basically, what it was a small stone structure under heavy guard. There were like these mage regiment soldiers guarding it and a bunch of spellcasters. And the player characters rode up here, and then there's a door. They were let in, and they went downstairs into an underground complex. And in this underground complex, they found a huge array of these big magical batteries. They basically looked like crystals, and they had this green and blue magic oscillating inside of them. And the spellcaster basically told them, here's what's going on. We have figured out what is happening, why magic is disappearing from our world. We've also figured out that it's much more serious than that. We have figured out that not only is magic being drained, but once the magic is drained, they're going to start draining our life force. We are being drained. This is an attack. This is not a benign byproduct. Someone is attacking us, taking our magic, and when that's gone, they're going to take our life force. And then So the characters are like, "What? Who's doing this?" And then basically this wizard said, there is another world. Basically, a world in another dimension that has constructed a machine capable of reaching through the fabric of reality, grabbing the magic in our world and sucking it through, and we don't know what they're using it for. We have only seen little glimpses of this, enough to vaguely understand what's happening. Here's what we need to do. Our world will die within the next 10 years completely if you do not help us with this mission. Well, if someone does not help us, but you are the ones who are best equipped. You are the best we could find. You're the most elite that are left after the war. The kingdom does not have many heroes left. You are it. We really need your help. We beg you to help. And so here's what we're going to need you to do. Hey, real quick, do your players ever do unexpected things? Do you ever find yourself thinking, what the heck, all my plans have gone to ruin? These players, as creative as they are, have just gone off on a tangent, and now I don't know what the heck is going on. If you ever feel this way, then I have the perfect tool for you. It's called the Ultimate Plot Randomizer. Ignite your campaign with endless adventure. This ebook contains 4 D100 tables, lets you random roll plot arcs on the fly. Roll on the hook table, the complication table, the climax table, and even on the wild and wacky table to add plot elements that your characters would never see coming. I give this ebook away for free to everyone who joins my email list. It's just my way of giving back and saying thanks to you and giving away a resource that, to be quite honest, I use nearly every single time I play and every time I session prep. If you want to get this ebook, all you have to do is join my email list. Link is in the description. If you sign up, you'll get an email autoresponder sent to you between a few seconds to 15 minutes after you sign up. The time tends to vary, so be a little tiny bit patient. It might take it like 15-20 minutes to show up in your inbox. And make sure to check your spam folder. But in that first email, the download link will be available. Click on it, download, print, boom, put with your stuff. Never get caught without amazing plot arcs ever again. Roll random plot arcs for days and days and days. Your player characters will literally not be able to keep up with how many amazing plot arcs you're able to create, and thus you will never have an adventure go off the rails again. I'm kidding. They'll probably still go off the rails. You'll just be way more prepared. Like I said, link is in the description. Grab that. Don't miss it. All right, let's get back to the video. Do you see these magic batteries? We have been pulling as much magic as possible from everywhere in our world, from our magic items, from artifacts, anywhere we could collect it, and we have amassed it in these batteries. Within these batteries is enough magic to send you to the world that is pulling the magic from us. Now, there are a few stipulations here. Number 1, we do not have the magic to fully send you there. We only have the magic to place you there temporarily. You will still need to be connected to these batteries to maintain your presence there. Thus, we are working on a limited time clock. If you do not figure out how to solve this problem before that time runs out, then you're going to just disappear from there and come back to here, and there will be no way to go back there. The connection will be severed. We won't even be able to maintain the connection, and that'll be it. That'll be our last chance gone. If you can succeed in turning off power over there, then you're going to have a choice. You can either end the connection and come back here, or you can stay over there and maybe you'll end up conquering that world for us or something, whatever. But here's the mechanism. And then they gave them all these magic rings. They said, put on these rings. And so they'll put on these rings. And they would say, that ring is your connection to these magic batteries in the other world. If the ring gets removed, you will immediately zap back here. But be advised, sometimes due to magical interference, you may also zap back here without even realizing it. In such cases, we try our best to make sure the connection reestablishes as quickly as possible. The wizards here, this is our full-time thing. We are working around the clock to keep you sustained over there and to continue to keep these batteries charged. But what we need you to do is we need you all to go over there and we need you to solve this problem. Another thing is that if you get too far away from each other, then you will basically disappear and reappear back with the group. And the reason for this is because we can't afford the power to spread you out over a large area. We have to keep you contained to a certain type of area. Now, out of game, what this was, these were mechanics for if a player didn't show up at a session, they would zap out due to magical interference. And this also was my way of keeping the party together because we had a really large group. This was going to be a party of basically 6 on the low side up to 13-ish players on the high side. And I wanted to keep the players together. So what I did was I made this mechanism so that if a player basically got too far away, so if they got like a quarter of a mile away from the rest of the group, I would random roll to see if it was too far. If they made it, okay, they're fine for now. But if they tried to go any further at all, then I'd roll again. And basically, once I rolled low enough, zoop, they would zap back out and come back to the party. Sometimes the group learned how to use this to their advantage, which I was fine with because it was a mechanic that I put into the game and it was a rule of law. And so they sometimes, for example, one of them would get arrested. The rest of the group would move far enough away that one person would zap back to the group, and they got away with a lot of shenanigans that way. But that was fine. That's fine. Anyway, then they were sent to this new world. They popped in with no clothes, no weapons, no anything, and they had to save their world from extinction. So that was the origin story of the Mazac campaign and how it began. Now, this is really interesting because you're going to find as I go through the next 2 episodes of this, where I kind of describe deeper, they didn't even meet Mazac yet. He wasn't even a part of this yet. Hey, hold on real quick. I have 2 questions for you. Do you love adventure? Do you love random roll tables? If so, then I have the perfect ebook for you. May I present the GM Philosopher's Ultimate Adventure Generator, 163 random roll tables on 310 printable pages governing nearly every aspect of adventure creation. If you love creating adventures and rolling on plat arcs to keep it fresh and new, then this is the ebook for you. Created in ultimate GM Philosopher fashion with random roll tables literally for days and days and days. You will be able to use this ebook to inject freshness into nearly every aspect of your adventure creation. Look at these chapters: selecting the adventure theme, defining the main quest, choosing the setting or location, identifying the main antagonist, determining key NPCs, generating obstacles and challenges, adding complications or plot twists, and more. And in every single chapter, there are all kinds of random tables. Let's take a look at chapter 1 just by itself. Selecting the adventure theme, we have an adventure genre table, we have a primary theme table, setting, environment, tone and mood, secondary theme, cultural inspiration, magic level, tech level, significant supernatural elements, what? Conflict scale, moral alignment, temporal setting, unique adventure hooks, and guess what? If we scroll all the way to the bottom of this chapter, a D20 table of plug and play adventure theme ideas, literally adventure themes you can just plug and play with. And that's only in chapter 1. There are 16 chapters in this book, and many of those chapters have D100 tables. There are over 20 D100 tables in this book. Being one of the newest GM Philosophy products, this ebook, The Ultimate Adventure Generator, is available right now for just $5.99. For just $5.99, you can get 163 random roll tables on 310 print-friendly pages, and guess what? It's available right now on my personal bookstore. Link is in the description, and if you purchase this, not only will you be getting literally random tables for days, but you'll be supporting an amazing channel run by small creators who are trying to make a huge difference in the TTRPG space and really bring a fresh element to it and make the game better for game masters everywhere. So don't delay, grab that in the description. You're not going to want to miss it. I'll see you on the other side, and make sure to roll a few D100s for me while you're at it. They were going over here from the old world, which was called, we called this World 0. And we called this the New World. And so this is really interesting. When they went to the New World, all of the magical languages were the same. Like those who spoke Elven in World 0. Elven in the New World was basically the same, although the dialect was a little different. It was kind of hard to speak, and there was like thick accents, but they could speak it. But Common was completely different. So Common, there was what we called Old Common, which was what was spoken in their homeworld. This became like a secret language amongst only those who traveled there because no one else spoke this language. In the New World, there was what was called New Common. And then so they had to learn New Common. And so they all got new languages for this. They had Old Common and New Common. So there's some really interesting things like that were going on. But basically what happened was they go to this new world, boom, there's magic here. They're able to cast spells. The spellcasters can do things. There are magic items. And so they have this thing and they have this limited amount of time to solve the problem. Now, here's what happens. They go to the new world and they start going on adventures. At first, they just have to find equipment. At first, they have to basically get gear, establish themselves. So they kind of start traveling, exploring, doing this and that, doing this and that. But what ended up happening was very quickly here, they learned that, first of all, there was a queen in this world who was running a massive kingdom, which they were not in. They actually appeared quite a ways away from the borders of this kingdom, so they had to travel there. But they learned there was a queen. Rumor has it that she had these magical machines that could drain magic from other places, and they fueled her with power. She was like the ultimate sorceress, was basically how they described her. They basically called her a god queen, and she was kind of like an Egyptian pharaoh type figure. So they thought, okay, she's probably the one who's doing this. So they started to head that direction. They also quickly realized that there was something else strange going on in this world. People started to say, this world is under attack. And it's like, what are you talking about? And they're like, there's this person, there's this entity, he that shall not be named. Never say his name, because if you say his name, it invites his presence, and it always shows up in the form of dragons. And the players are like, what in the world are you talking about? What is his name? And at first nobody would even tell them his name, but then they learned his name was Mazac, like Mazaak, Mazac. And then so at one point one person like whispered it to the party, and then suddenly there was a chill in the air, and then there was a roar come from overhead, and through the clouds came this dragon, just seemingly out of nowhere. The party fought so many dragons in that campaign, because literally every time Mazak's name was spoken, dragons would show up, and they would get more and more powerful every time the name was spoken. So it got to the point where it was literally like, he who shall not be named, do not say his effing name. Do not say it. And then if some NPC would say it, they'd be like, oh my god, and then maybe like 3 dragons would show up, and it got to be a real big problem. But they were like, what is going on here? What in the heck is even going on here? And then what it turned out to be was that it turned out that there's this entity named Mazaak who seemed to be traveling through time and space, and had arrived here with the intent to dominate this planet. And so there was this sort of like actual aspect to the campaign where there were kind of 2 objectives. They needed to kind of stop this queen and stop the magical draining. But then there was this Mazaak figure who actually seemed to be a bigger problem than the queen. And so they got roped into this situation, because everywhere they went, there were people trying to figure out how to solve the Mazaak problem. And that's what they were concerned about. This world was basically locking down for what they thought was about to be some kind of apocalypse from this invading entity. And there were also pockets of cultists springing up who were serving this entity, right? And one of the player characters actually joined one of these cults, took it over, and started their own massive cult worshipping Mazaak. So there was one player in this party who actually high-key became a Mazaak follower, to the point where in the final battle against Mazaak, they turned on the rest of the party and fought for him. Like, they fought on the other side. And it was such a really cool, long-lasting, like, it was such a long-term betrayal, because this went on for months and months behind the scenes, but the other players did not even realize it. Me and this other player had secret things going on where this player was trying to betray the party. They would send information to Mazaak about what the party was doing and planning, etc., etc. Anyway, so this was the setup for the campaign. And then it turned out like this. Players, they learn about Mazaak as they go. They pursue this queen situation as they go. And there's so much to talk about. And there was a mix of good and evil characters. Everything from a lawful good Minotaur to a chaotic evil orc barbarian to a lawful evil necromancer to like a neutral good druid of the land. I mean, it was a huge mix of different types of characters, and there was a lot of player-on-player violence. In fact, nearly every single session, the chaotic evil orc barbarian and the lawful good Minotaur paladin would get into fights. They would clash in combat nearly every single session. And sometimes this would get interrupted by people saying things like, stop it, this is exactly what Mazaak wants. And then they'd hear a roar, and their combat would be interrupted by them getting attacked by a dragon. Sometimes this was done on purpose to stop them from fighting. But it was like this, and there were all these interesting alliances that formed. For example, there was a lawful good monk, and then the neutral good druid, and then the lawful evil necromancer. The 3 of them formed this like powerful coalition where they were like, okay, we have to set aside our differences and we need to stop fighting amongst ourselves. So it kind of turned into the situation where even the good and evil characters, they would band together and form a coalition to say, we can fight each other when this is over. In fact, there's this running joke that like the lawful evil necromancer and the monk, they were at such odds with each other that they would basically say things like, when this is over, I dread the battle we're going to have because we're going to have to fight it out. We are going to become enemies when this is done. And then the other would be like, yes, when this is done, we will have our fight. But they agreed for the sake of defeating Mazac and saving their homeworld that they had to put their differences aside. So this was a really interesting thing. And this gave me a lot of experience into like player versus player stuff. There was so much, everything happened player versus player in this campaign. And it gave me a lot of really good experience. And this was like a 2 to 3 year campaign. So it was very, very long term. Now, with that being said, here's what ended up happening. And I'm going to kind of wrap up. And this is going to be story of basically the first edition of this campaign, the first 2 to 3 years of it, which is basically what I call the Mazac campaign. What ended up happening was they realized that Mazac was an age-old entity. Nobody really knew his history specifically because everything about him had been blotted out by the gods. He was so profane. The gods hated him so much that literally anything written about him was magically blotted out. So when the players would find things about him, they would try to read it, but it would be blurry. And it's like, why is this like this? And at first they thought he was trying to hide his history from them, but this wasn't true. The gods were blotting out his history because they wanted to try to eliminate every trace of him throughout all of time and space. There was an incident that happened millennia ago where he had tried to invade and he actually took over the world, and then he had tried to go to the realm of gods, but Groomsh actually stood before him. Groomsh was the only one willing to go face to face with him in the in-between. There's like this place in my world, say, where there's the realm of gods and then there's the mortal realm, but then there's an in-between space. There's like, I call it the path of gods. It's like a zone between those two zones. And Groomsh alone was willing to stand in the gap, go to the path of gods and battle Mazac, and he actually defeated him and cast him down again and basically destroyed him and freed the world. And so Groomsh in this setting had a lot of power. Many of the other gods feared him and wouldn't cross him because he was the one who proved that he could best Mazac in combat the first time around. But that was thousands of years ago. Today, it became apparent that Mazac was way more powerful than he had been that time. He had rebuilt and relaunched his attack. And it turned out that his goal was not world domination. He only wanted to control the world so that he could amass enough power to go to the realm of gods. His goal was to ascend, to become the one true god. He was going to take out the realm of gods, and then he was going to take the power from there and go up to face Ao, who was like the over god, the god of the gods. Mazac was aiming to become the primary god of everything, the one and the only, the beginning and the end. And it also, there was some clarity that came into what Mazac was. And it turned out that Mazac actually began life at some point in a past timeline and in a past version of reality. He actually started life as a human, but there was something interesting about him. As a little boy, he learned that he had the ability to manipulate time. And eventually he learned that he had the ability to travel between timelines. And so what he ended up doing was he ended up learning how to use this ability. And then he'd rewind and he'd go again, rewind and go again. And he ended up living his entire lifetime over and over and over and over, amassing more and more knowledge, practicing his arts. He also became a very powerful wizard. He was inherently a sorcerer. He also had, he developed really incredible combat abilities. He was known to have sort of like monk-like abilities. He was also known to be an incredible strategist. And so all of these things he taught himself, living his lifetime over and over and over again. And he, for some reason or another, and this isn't actually touched on until in future campaigns, but he decided he was the one who should become the overgod, and that became his goal. So for thousands of years, over multiple timelines, countless different lifetimes lived, this became his goal that he worked toward. And this timeline that the players were in was what was called the central timeline. This was called This was called, we called it something like main time or something like that. And so this was the one that counted. There was only one timeline that stretched from the beginning to the end, and it was like the primary time. All the other timelines would like shunt off and end at some point. Mazaak used those as his playgrounds, but he would come back to the main timeline to wage real war. And so this time, the gods were worried, we're not even together. We are actually worried we're not going to be able to stop him. Now, there was a rule. The gods were not allowed to come down to the mortal realm. And the reason for this was because they were all too afraid of, like, so for example, what if Grumsh went to the modern or the material world? What if he came down to the material world and he took it over? And if he monopolized all the worship and all the prayers, now he would become ultra powerful, and the other gods would die out. Because what keeps the gods alive once they reach the realm of gods is the prayers and the worship of their followers. And the more followers and the more prayers they have, basically the more powerful they are, at least to a certain degree. So the gods all had an agreement not to go to the material world. They could have champions there, but they could not go there, and they could not send their avatars there. They could only send their champions there. So the gods were sort of paranoid and distrusting of each other. Many of them feared Grumsh, but there were also big hitters among them. For example, Nerul was a big hitter. Hyronius was a big hitter. Pelor was a big hitter. So these gods were more prevalent. Like in my setting, they were kind of like the big, powerful gods. But anyway, with that being said, these gods couldn't go to the material plane to stop Mazaak there. They were watching him take over the world and get to the power that was going to cause him to be able to come after them. So they saw these heroes, the characters who had come from another world just to save their world. These gods presided over both worlds. They were the gods in the old world and the new world. But they saw these heroes and they thought, these heroes have crossed worlds and dimensions to save their plane. Let us choose them as champions. And so that's what happened. These gods chose the gods chose these players as their champions, and they said, we will do everything we can to help you. We will give you magic items. We will give you gold. We will give you power. We'll give you artifacts. Stop Mazaak. And so that's what happened. The gods gave them incredible weaponry. They gave them incredible gold resources. They gave them blessings. They would send them help whenever possible. They basically went all out trying to help these players, but the players became champions of the gods, which became kind of crazy because the gods were plotting. They thought to themselves, okay, Mazaak's going to get stopped. What's going to happen after we stop him? We have these champions, very powerful. The gods started to plot against each other during this time. And so they were starting to turn the champions against each other. The god of Nerul was saying to the lawful evil necromancer, listen, when this is all done, I plan to really grow my power. You can help me. And then Hyronius was saying to the lawful evil or the lawful good monk, after this is done, the gods are going to turn on each other. You must be very weary. Be careful of these evil players. You can't let them get too powerful here, lest after the battle, they run amok, right? So there's like a lot of this kind of infighting, and this was all political, player on player, gods intervening, kind of like, drama, basically. This is so dramatic. It was such a dramatic campaign. So, but then what happened was, we get to the point where Mazaak is fighting them. Mazaak has gathered enough power. He has taken over enough of the world. The players have been fighting him, but he's hard to fight in one place, like in the world. They realize that the place where they're gonna actually have to face him is on the path of gods in the in-between. That's sort of like a funnel, because Mazaak could go around, teleport around, manipulate time and all this stuff in the material, like the mortal plane. But he would have to go through the realm of the path of gods. It was the only way to get to the realm of gods. So the players were like, that is it. That's the stranglehold. We need to fight him there. The gods gave the player characters the ability to travel there, and that's what happened. They traveled there to do final battle with Mazaak. And the form that Mazac took for the major battle was that of an ancient red dragon, but even greater, more ancient, bigger, more powerful. He had all of the dragon abilities, but they were hyped up. He also had other things. He had a full range of spell casting abilities. Like he was a wizard and a sorcerer. He had time manipulation. As legendary actions, he could rewind time to cancel player actions, like once per round. Like, for example, if a player landed an especially good hit, he could manipulate time to rewind time and cancel that, and then the player would lose their turn, which was a huge feel bad. It was a big F you to the player. They made the players so angry, and it was so glorious. He also had anti-magic beholder eyes. So like he literally, his two eyes were beholder eyes that he had taken from two beholders he had killed. So everywhere he looked, there could be no magic. And then he would use his breath weapon and he would attack, right? So he was a nasty, nasty fight. And all these players, by the time we reached that fight, all of the players were epic level. With that being said, they were at different level points. We had some that were actually more like 18th, 19th level because they had been spending XP on things. During this campaign, we had a lot of XP spending. Every time you died and were resurrected, you'd lose XP. Some of the players died many times during the campaign and had to be resurrected. Also, anytime you cast a wish spell in 3rd edition, you have to spend XP. Sometimes it takes levels away if you try to wish for something too powerful. Wish and Miracle got cast dozens of times during that campaign. So some of the players had burnt too much XP casting Wish on the way to the final fight. Our highest level character actually was the druid. We had a neutral good druid. She had a legendary animal companion, Fang the wolf, and then she was a druid. She had not used XP for anything. She had not died, I don't think, during the whole campaign, and she had been very careful not to spend XP on any wishes or miracles. She had cast 9th level spells, but never that cost XP. So she was at level 26. Most of the players were at level either 25 or 24. And then we had a couple players who had been really careless with their XP or had died a lot, who were kind of down in the either like 18, 19, 20, 21 range. The whole party were these levels. They were fighting. And then we had one who was a level like 23 or something who turned against the party to fight with Mazac. So it was a nasty, brutal fight. And there were a range of NPCs too. It was a whole session, this epic fight, and they fought Mazac. And the first thing they had to do was take out his eyes because the anti-magic eyes were killing them. So they all used everything they could mundane to throw at him, first to take out the eyes, and then the monk, the lawful good monk, was the tank, and he kited him. He actually went up to him and was like fist fighting him at close range, and it was really, really nasty. The monk was, at several points, he would get hit and he would be basically almost dead, or he'd get put down, and then the healers would heal him and he'd go back up to full health. I mean, we had the druid was constantly healing. There was also an epic level NPC cleric who had been with him the whole time, and she was basically, her job was healing the monk. So she would shield him, so she would take half his damage. She would heal herself and him just constantly. That was her whole job. Meanwhile, the druid, once they got rid of the anti-magic guys, the druid's whole job, the druid had spent the entire campaign building harm spells. I don't know if you remember harm in 3rd edition, but it's basically you touch a creature and you reduce it to 1d4 hit points. And it was a really powerful, I think it was a 7th level spell. This druid, in preparation for this fight, had been stacking up harm spells, storing harm spells in gems of spell storing, having it prepared as many times as possible, scrolls of harm, rings of spell storing that had harm in them. She had like 20 casts of harm, and every single turn what she was doing was harm every single turn. And it was really hard though, because he had such a high spell resistance that even her, as a level 26 character, needed to roll, I think it was either an 18, 19, or 20 just with all her bonuses calculated, with just for her harm to even take effect and to get through his spell resistance. He had such a high spell resistance. She actually the whole fight, she only hit twice with harm. And those were actually really important because they didn't render him down to 1d4, but they did knock out huge amounts of his HP. And then that coupled with other things, they were able to eventually grind him down. Toward the end of the battle, I mean, so many wild things happened during that battle. The monk actually threw the dragon at one point with a maneuver by rolling like 2 criticals in a row. He was able to actually throw him. It just so much wild stuff, so much crazy stuff happened. But they were actually eventually able to beat him up, render him like he morphed out of the dragon form into human form as he grew too weak to fight, and they just beat him to a pulp. And then they through the course of this adventure, they had made a lot of powerful friends. Asmodeus was one of them. Asmodeus, the god of the hells, the 9 hells, the leader of the 9 hells, very powerful. They had a very mutually respectful relationship with Asmodeus by this point, so they rang up their buddy Asmodeus, who shows up with his legions of pit fiends, and is basically like, listen, we need you to take him. We can't kill him. They were trying to kill him. They couldn't kill him. They were like, we need you to do something about this. And then Asmodeus is like, I understand. This creature can't be killed, at least not here, not in this timeline, not in a way that we understand. So don't worry. I will keep him under control. And how the campaign ended was Asmodeus took Mazac down to the deepest level of the 9 hells, put him in this thing where basically hellfire would constantly, like lava would constantly run over him, and it burnt him down to just a skeleton. But that was the deepest it could go, and he was stuck there basically in what would be supposed to be eternal torment, but what it really was the lava, the magical lava flowing through the 9 levels of hell, kept him weak enough that he could not regenerate. That's what it did. So he was in a state of too weak to escape, couldn't regenerate. That was it. Interestingly enough, he did have enough power to reach out a little bit telepathically. Another creature in the 9 hells, who was actually a very important part of the 9 hells but had nothing to do with this campaign, she just happened to be there the whole time. In Avernus, the first layer, Tiamat, Mazac reaches out for anyone to reach out to, with the possibility of trying to manipulate his way out of here, because he realized he actually couldn't escape. Asmodeus had him so locked down that he could not escape. So he reached out as far as he could, and the one creature he made contact with who did not immediately just dismiss him was Tiamat, and they began to forge a friendship, which would lead to the events of campaign number 2. But for now, this was the end of campaign number 1. The player characters were basically made ultimate champions by the gods. They lived out the rest of their lives basically being legendary kings and queens, and basically went on to be the rulers of this world state, the new world it was called, which was actually Greyhawk. It turned out to be my homebrewed version of Greyhawk. And they went on to be kings and queens and became truly legendary, like very legendary, and such was a happy ending to the campaign, with a few minor exceptions. The lawful evil necromancer disappeared because he had to go into hiding, because all the good characters were now like keeping an eye out for him. And so they kind of had to scatter like that. But alas, hence, so ended an era. The world was once again saved from the wrath of Mazac. And at least for now, all was fine. They also destroyed the magical array that the queen had, saved their homeworld, but many of them did not choose to return to their homeworld. They chose to remain in the new world. It also turned out that there was some weird stuff going on. At the end of the campaign, they actually had to fight the queen, who turned out to be very powerful and formidable. Of course, she had been amassing all this magic, so she was powerful. But then a secret emerged. It turned out that she was actually Mazac's birth mother, and this secret had been kept hidden this whole time. What significance did that have? What was that going to mean for the future? Well, that's a good question, and that would come out more in sections 2 and 3 of the campaign moving forward. But for now, It was just a mystery, and no one really knew what to make of it. And that is the story of the first campaign of Mazac, the first Mazac campaign, and basically one of my favorite villains, my favorite campaign settings, one of my all-time favorite experiences gaming, 2 to 3 year campaign. Super fun. So there's my story. Let me know if you have any questions about it. Thank you for coming back for another episode of GM Philosophy in the Morning. I'm here every single day, creating videos about the best game in the world, D&D. I'll be back tomorrow and the next day with chapters 2 and 3 of the story, and boom, we'll continue it. I'll see you guys then.